Hey,
Uh, okay, we are live now. Good evening. Uh, uh, Welcome to the online platform of the English department of Shammilani Mohabiddyalay. Today is the third day of our online lecture series. Today we have with us, like the other day, Sayan Chattopadhyay from Baripur College. The previous day he talked about the basic or key concepts of media studies or communication studies. Today he will be speaking on globalization and political economy of media. So I welcome Shayanda, uh, and I welcome my colleagues also, Partho and Shamradda. So please take over. Thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you once again. And as I already said in the last lecture, that
Department
I
of
will
Samudani
continue.
Mohabit. Previous day he and
Uh,
I welcome my colleague.
I think there is a feedback somewhere.
I think someone is playing the YouTube video. We should
Ach-
mute ourselves and then let Shayanda speak.
Yes, I
Good
think
chance.
it's now gone. Yeah. As I already said in the last lecture, the last half of the lecture, that I will continue, and I consider this as a single lecture divided into two, because all these issues and debates are related to each other. And if you remember that uh, in the last lecture, I started with a quote from Allen Ginsberg, and that was, "Whoever controls the media, the images controls the culture." So this kind of gives us a kind of an entry point into understanding the various issues related to media. And this entry point is into the political economy of media. This is about and by political economy we are actually trying to uh, indicate towards a specific kind of a study of media and communication, which emphasizes or focuses on the power relations. And these power relations are from various sectors, not only from ownership. It can obviously uh, point to policies, regulations, funding, even like the financial structure of a country, like whether it's a neoliberal country or late capitalism or whatever. So this aspect is very crucial to understand media, even for those who are actually being introduced to media studies or communication studies for the first time, because this would give a totally different dimension from the things that we have discussed yesterday. Because yesterday's discussion was mainly on the various elements of communication and how those elements have changed over the years, and how those elements also influence us in various manners. And today we are trying to understand how media works, how media functions, and what are the elements that influence media. Uh, so, one of the ways to understand is to confront a very kind of a um, common question as such. And that common question, and most of the time I'm confronted with these questions, even to the media studies honor students or media studies general students, who ask me that most of the media started with a public service attitude in their mind. They started with the idea that uh, this is a noble cause, this is a noble service, and we are here to execute that service. But right now, if we look at media, it's a very commercial, very market oriented, and very profit oriented kind of media. So how this transition happened, and I think it's very crucial for any one of us who is being introduced to media and communication studies to understand this transition which has happened over the years. And it is a kind of a historical trajectory. So even if we focus on one single media, for example, if we discuss print media, or for that matter newspaper, uh, the trajectory of the other media like television and radio would be almost the same. Obviously, since the media is different, the changes and the various context would be different, but more or less the trajectory would be same. Uh, so for example, if we look at newspaper, for that matter, in India, newspaper started in India in 1780. And it is pretty early if you consider the history of newspaper. It was in early 1700 when in Europe and in America the first newspapers were printed, and within a span of 75-80 years India, and Kolkata was printing its own newspaper, and it was printed by James Augustus Hickey. And if you remember that one of the reasons for printing this newspaper, uh, uh, wh- the question is, first of all, the question is that why suddenly in 1780 uh, James Augustus Hickey, a Britisher, why he is suddenly thinking about printing a newspaper? Well, the obvious the reason is that at that point of time there is very little to do, and there are very little options regarding leisure activity. And these people, they were mainly tradesmen, businessmen coming to India and staying here for a long period of time, and they wanted to know what is happening in Europe, what is happening in international market, when a particular ship will come, what are the prices. So these informations were there, and also there were several not so newsworthy information, but very interesting to read kind of information, the happenings of that time, 1780s and early 1800, those kind of events and incidents were also published in this newspaper. So we have one category of newspaper publishers in the colonial time. That is the Britishers, and there are several newspapers from 1780 to 1947. There were more than 120 20 newspapers published. All of them were not daily newspapers. Some of them were weekly or fortnightly, but nonetheless newspapers. So several Britishers followed James Augustus Hickey, and several such English newspapers were published by the Britishers. Who who are the others who were publishing at that point of time? Uh, for example, another category of people who were publishing at that time was the social reformers. I mean, a lot of people were included, including Ram Mohan Rai and others. And another group who were publishing at that particular time, again, it's very much known and it's very much familiar. The people who were involved with freedom struggle, people who were in favor of independence, they were also publishing newspaper, and there were very few um, freedom strugglers who were not uh, involved in at least one newspaper or periodical at that time. Either they were editing the newspaper or periodicals, or they were writing the newspaper and periodicals in a very regular manner. And the fourth group, if you remember again, and these are there in our history books, in the school history books, in other context obviously, but it's already known that the other group at that time publishing newspaper was the Christian missionaries, and their main motivation was to spread the message of Christianity in various territories, and they were publishing newspapers and periodicals on a regular basis. So from 1780s till 1947, these four groups, I mean, if you consider all the newspaper published in during this time, uh, these four groups were responsible for publishing these newspapers: the Britishers, the Christian missionaries, the social reformers, and the people involved with freedom struggle. Now the question is that these are a this is a very diverse group of people. They come from they are with a very different kind of motivations, but what is that single connecting thread that these four groups are connected with? What is that single connecting thread? And the answer is ready at hand, that they were actually uh, publishing the paper with a particular kind of motivation, but not to make profit, not to make money. So they were not considering newspaper publication as a business. They were not considering newspaper publication as a profit making venture. They were, as Vanita Kohli has mentioned, that they were here to fight a cause and not to make money. So I have a specific cause, either it's a social reform related cause or an independence related cause, or spreading of religious messages and all these things, and I'm not here to make money. So from the very beginning, if you see, from 1780s to 1947, the motivation was not to make money. It's a public service. I have a specific kind of a motivation or ideology, and I'm using newspaper as an instrument of public opinion formation. I'm here to influence people in such a way that they will agree with me or whatever cause that I have, and I'll uh, have them beside me through this newspaper and everything. So we have Ram Mohan Rai writing about Sati in English newspaper and Bengali newspaper, and even Gandhiji starting specific newspaper, Bal Gangadhar, there are several others. Now, if even after independence, even after 1947, you will see a number of publishers publishing newspapers without even thinking about profit as such. And they were able to do so because they had income coming from other sources. For example, Goenkas, they had real estate, so they were investing that, and several other businesses, and they were investing money into newspaper publication. And what is the motivation? The motivation is very simple. You have a newly independent nation state, and the moment you gain independence, you think about nation building. You have a dream and you have to fulfill that dream. You have to realize that dream, and everybody wanted to contribute, even the people with various businesses. And again, if you remember, this was a time when the market was flooded with post world war profit, and that post world war profit was a surplus income. So they were also investing that money into newspaper business, and for various other reasons. Even even in the immediate post-independence period, nobody actually concentrated on newspaper as a business. They were also using the newspaper in terms of nation building, in terms of realizing the various uh, dreams that were there in the colonial period in the mind of the freedom strugglers and social reformers. And for that matter, even in the villages where it is difficult to distribute the newspapers, some business houses were, or individuals were actually hiring boats and going into the villages of the untouchables, and distributing newspapers. So these kind of motivations, almost, I mean, very very interesting motivations were there even after the independence, in the immediate post independence period. Now, if you ask me, the what was the exact period, what was the exact time when newspapers started to develop a kind of market oriented motivation objective? uh, Obviously, this is not an exact date, or there is no such exact period as such, but we can obviously say that with the first press commission report in the 1950s, 53 probably, there is this mention of the price page schedule, which basically said that a particular newspaper cannot offer uh, mm, a significant number of pages within with a small, in exchange of a small price. So if the price is, say for example, 5 rupees, then the maximum number of pages that newspaper can offer would be like 20 pages. You cannot exceed that maximum number of pages. And this was eventually, ultimately, it was withdrawn because the court ordered that this is not fair business. If someone is willing to offer more pages in exchange of less money, then there is no other way to stop them. uh, but what is very important for us is that this kind of gives us an indication that the newspaper publication sector is thinking in terms of money. The newspaper publication industry is thinking in terms of business. And later on, if you see, and I'll just very quickly describe what happened and how we come up to this particular situation where the entire, not only newspaper business, but the entire media is heavily commercialized and thinking almost only about profit. Is that in 75 there is the emergency was declared, and 77 it was lifted, and there was a huge kind of a man-made demand for news. People were looking for news. That is why from 77 onwards there is a huge demand for newspapers, suddenly a kind of an artificial demand for newspaper. And also three things happened. One is the literacy level went up. There is a huge advancement of technology. The technological development happened in terms of printing technologies. And a steady urbanization happened. And the moment there is growing urbanization, there is the need for newspapers and various other items related to uh, uh, people's everyday needs. So there was a boost after the emergency. There was a boost in newspaper consumption, and that boost was also kind of confronted with an increased number of competition, not only from television but also in terms of other publications like magazines, and also the uh, continuously expanding number of newspapers as well. So from 77, from late 70s and early 80s, newspapers started to compete for the reader's attention or the audience's attention, not only in terms of the other newspapers, but also in terms of magazines, in terms of radio networks, in terms of television networks. And from late 80s and 90s, the television network also expanded with the introduction of cable and satellite broadcasting in India. So number of channels increased, number of options increased. And you know that from late 1980s and 1990s, neoliberalism happened, the opening up of the market happened, deregulation of the market happened. So various other players came into existence, and the competition became very, very high. So the problem with newspaper business is that it's not only competition that kind of compelled newspaper to become very commercial for survival, but also because newspaper, and if you just look into it, you'll realize that newspaper as a product is an unique product. Because newspaper, uh, whenever there is a business, the basic structure of the business is that your production cost would be lower than your retail price. So if I want to sell a particular pen, for that matter, I have to produce that pen, I have to manufacture that pen, for example 5 rupees, and I have to sell that pen for 6 or 7 rupees. So 2 or 3 rupees is my surplus income, I profit. That is the basic structure of any product for business. But if you look at newspaper, for any newspaper which is being published right now, the the number of pages, the color pages, the glossy prints and everything, if you take into account, it would cost you around 20 rupees to 50 rupees as such for a single newspaper. But you are selling it for like 5 rupees, or even in some days it's 10 rupees or 50, maybe 7 rupees. uh, so the entire structure is different. You have a product where the production cost is higher than the retail price, and you can't do anything about it. So how do you compensate? Obviously you compensate through the revenues generated by advertisement. So the advertisement revenue was almost 80-20 ratio, was in the 80-20 ratio. Now it has come down 60-40 ratio, but the advertisement remained the lifeblood of newspaper as such. And the interesting aspect is that how do you get advertisement? You get advertisement, and this is a vicious circle. You get advertisement by showing that you have a very high circulation of newspapers. So if a particular newspaper has 3 crores circulation, you can demand high ad rates, lakhs of rupees. If a newspaper has very less circulation, then for the same ad in the same day, maybe of the same size in the same page, would cost less. You cannot demand a high rate of advertisement for the paper, because the circulation is very low. So your ad rate, your profit, your revenues, which is coming from advertisement, is dependent on on your circulation figures. And how do you ensure that your circulation figures are high and it's continuously going up? It's by doing very aggressive kind of marketing. You have to do a lot of advertisement, a lot of billboards, hoardings. You have to go through digital media so that people will take notice and read your newspaper. They'll not shift to other publications. They will stick to your, they will become loyal to your newspaper. And obviously, as you can understand, for all these marketing and promotional practices, you need a lot of money. You need a huge amount of money for marketing and promotion practices. And how do you get money? Through advertisement. So this becomes a very problematic kind of a cyclic structure. So that if you have money, you will be able to do more marketing. If you can do more marketing, your circulations figures go higher. And if your circulation figure is high, then you'll get uh, then your ad rate would become higher. If your ad rate is high, then you'll obviously you are generating a lot of revenues from advertisements, and you have enough money for marketing. If you are not being able to do that, then it's very difficult. So if you look at the newspaper industry, the top 5 or top 10 newspapers, for that matter, even in English newspaper or in language press, they are taking the lion's share of the profit, and everybody else are actually fighting for the crumbs. They and if you ask any person such, if you ask them to can you name 5 English newspapers, 6 English newspapers, maybe they will be able to name or list 5 or 6 daily newspapers. Then he or she is at a loss. we don't even know the names of various other newspapers. I mean, lakhs of newspapers are registered under RNI, a body where you have to register to publish newspaper, and several hundred newspapers, probably thousand newspapers, are registered under ABC, Audit Bureau of Circulation, which gives you the annual circulation figures. But ultimately, we remember the first five or six or even 10, if you are an avid newspaper reader, the first 10 newspapers. Even in Bangla, if I ask you to tell me the name of 10 newspapers, generally most of the people will stop at five or six newspapers, because you don't even know the names of the other newspapers. So you'll realize, if you are in the top five, top three, top section, then you'll be able to make enough profit to survive, to, you know, do marketing and to increase your circulation figure, and to remain in the top. And if you suddenly lose, then it becomes an issue of existence. You will just be crushed by the other big players. And this has remained the case even till now, even after the introduction of foreign direct investment, even after circulation revenues from circulation figures have gone higher up, because the newspaper business has remained a kind of investment intensive business and low return business. So why I wanted to, start with this is that this gives us an idea that whenever we are talking about the commercialization of media, from its public service role to a commercial profit oriented role, we have to think about the various changes, not only socio-political economic changes, but also in terms of business, in terms of regulations, in terms of policy, in terms of nations own approach towards various elements of this. And this kind of gives us an idea what is an political economic perspective on media is. And uh, as I already discussed, that these things happened because several changes happened in the socio-economic scenario, socio-economic condition of our nations. That, and one of them was late 80s and early 1990s neoliberalism, opening up of the market. And again, uh, uh, if you pay attention, that this is also the point, one may say, according to several sociologists and economists, that this is also the point when the globalization and neoliberalism uh, goes hand in hand. Because unless there is an opening up of the market, the forces of globalization cannot work out in the way it wants to in a particular national territory. And this kind of gives us an idea of how globalization also forces media houses to compete with each other, because there is this opening up of the field and various other players are coming in and trying to grab the attention uh, of the audience. But before I go into globalization and media, let me just understand that what are the various factors that kind of led into this particular situation. Let me again just begin with a specific kind of dilemma that is related, that is associated with globalization. I have two images of the earth. One is the very popular and very familiar image of the earth, the clean and very blue globe of our planet. And another is the image from the NASA website, which kind of is a computer generated images, uh, which gives an idea about the space debris, the space junk that is revolving around our earth in space. And there is a huge hue and cry about the space junk and everything, but ultimately these are the result of the various satellites which were sent into space. And if you remember that these satellites are the main elements through which we get to watch our cable television, our internet, our mobile phone works through these satellites. So this kind of, why I wanted to start with this image is that the earth, the very clean and dazzling kind of blue dot, that is an ideal thing which we all want. But at the same time, we actually get the earth with all the space debris and space junk revolving around its orbit. And we cannot actually say no to that image, because if we say no to that image, then we'll have to live a life without internet, without cable television, without telephone connection, because the satellites won't be there. So any kind of discussion on globalization is very problematic since the pros and cons almost balance out. If I give you 2 points in favor of globalization, you'll be able to give me maybe 4 points against globalization. So what we have to do, what should be our approach is to become aware of the various perspectives of globalization and media, and to become cautious about the various influences, the hidden influences, the politics behind the various issues related to globalization, instead of having a very clear cut position in favor of globalization or against globalization, because that would not be very fruitful or constructive, for that matter, for any student or person interested in globalization and media. So I have just two images. I'm deliberately interchanging these two images. One is the 1901 map of undersea telegraph cabling, and another is 2008 map that shows submarine cable capacity, which is now optical fiber cabling. Look at the similarities between these two maps. One from 1901 and another is very recent 2008. And this gives us an idea that these two maps this gives us an idea that globalization is actually not a very recent phenomenon. If you consider globalization as something of a connection between the various continents, it actually started to happen from the 1850s with the laying of submarine cables and telegraph cables. And two things happened. One is the technology was there to connect the continents, and another is that there was a motivation. There were various motivations but from a media perspective, for example, if you look at the historical emergence of news agencies, and by news agencies I mean those organizations which gather information and news and then sell those information news to various news houses, media houses, news media houses, in exchange of money. And there are several such news agencies. But this news agency used to cover a huge territory, for that matter, in the early 1800s. Uh, but from 1869, they started to divide up the world. And since there was this submarine cable network already in existence, the first global system of communication as such, so they were using that communication system to communicate with each other. And they kind of divided their own territories. Uh, so, for example, the Havas press agency, which was established in 1835 in France, which is now known as Agency France Press (AFP), they were concentrating on France. Associated Press, they were concentrating on United States of America. Reuters in Britain, and Wolf was focusing on Germany. So these news agencies were dividing up the world in terms of collecting information, and they were connected to other parts through that network of cables, which was laid in middle of 1850s. So this kind of gives us an idea that globalization is not a very new thing. It's a very novel thing. What is new is the force at which it is happening right now, the aggressiveness with which this is happening and influencing our lives right now. But in terms of connecting each other through communication technologies, in terms of rapidly integrating the various continents, it kind of happened much earlier, maybe in the middle of 1800. Uh, Now, if you look at the media sector after globalization, and in the Indian scenario after new liberalization, you will see that there are very few players. They are the global players. They are the global media conglomerates who are dominating the market, and this keeps on changing. I mean, if these are the top 5 or 6 media conglomerates which are influencing and dominating the market, this will change in 1 or 2 years maybe, in terms of their influence, in terms of profit generated, in terms of number of holdings, because mergers and acquisitions and takeovers are happening almost on a daily basis, so it keeps on changing. But the fact remains that only a few handful of media companies, big media companies, they are actually dominating the entire media market, including the India's media market. Now, let me just give you one example. uh, if you, for example, there are various television networks in India, more than 400 television networks, television channels, and various other networks. Now, for example, I'm doing this from Kolkata. So one of the important channels, very popular channels, is Star TV. And we watch Star TV almost on a daily basis. There are various channels of Star TV, but we do not actually try to think of who is actually controlling Star TV, who is the owner of Star TV. The parent company of Star TV is News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's empire. Rupert Murdoch is a media mogul, as a very colorful personality. And News Corporation owns Star Television Network, and Star is an acronym. Star Television stands for Satellite Television Asian Region. Satellite television Asian region means a satellite television that is operating within the Asian territory. And this gives you a hint that if it is named as satellite television Asian region, then obviously there are other regions where other such networks are operating under a News Corporation, under the ownership of Rupert Murdoch. Absolutely right. I mean, if you, as you can see on the screen, if you go in the European sector, there is Sky Broadcasting, which is again a company which is associated with Tata Sky, the Tata Sky DTH service. Sky Broadcasting. If you go to US, you have Fox Television Network, which is again a news corporation or News Corp company. And not only television channels, you have streaming services like Fox, you have the film studio and distribution. Now all the film industry is vertically integrated, so you have distribution, production, and various other things going on under the one umbrella. So 20th Century Fox is there. You have publication houses, and very well known publication houses like HarperCollins Publications. You have Dow Jones, you have Wall Street Journal, various others. I mean, like the program formats. We'll discuss about program formats later on. Like American Idol is actually owned by a News Corporation, Rupert Murdoch's empire. So even the regional channels that you get to see under Star, or the regional channels in US and UK, those are also owned by a News Corporation and controlled by News Corp. And this is how media conglomerate, the media businesses are kind of concentrating on specific territories and trying to control that the content and the market of that particular territory. And if you look at the entire world, ultimately these 5 or 6 big media companies are dominating the entire market. You are thinking of a channel or a particular program as regional or national, but if you just look into it, you will find out that somewhere or the other it is related to global communication, global production, global format business, and all these things. But then again, if you look at the actual impact of globalization, there are no such uh, media which is truly global. I mean, even if you consider these hugely powerful media businesses, even those businesses, those media houses cannot reach in each and every territory of the world. So what we are actually talking about as a global, that's category, the global as a category, is actually too small and too rich and too English speaking for that matter to be considered as inclusive. So it's mainly the urban metropolitan audience, uh, and their taste and their kind of consumption that we are labeling as global, at least to a certain extent. And if you talk about a global public sphere, even the existence of the global public sphere is highly debated, and it's almost an impossibility. Even if you look at, as I was talking about this in the last session, uh, that the issues and debates and even the media stories that we are talking about is widely different from even our neighborhood countries. I mean, you let alone US and Europe. So if there was a global public sphere, then we would be talking about the same issues, debates, and media stories. But we are not. We are very hyper local, we are very hyper national, and we rarely give attention to the stories which are international in nature. And it works both ways. I mean, uh, um, similar to us who don't even consider the international stories as worth watching. It's similarly, the developed countries rarely look at stories emerging from the developing countries. So there is no such global public sphere. And but what is important for us to remember is that there is a huge force of globalization on media, and obviously globalization is riding on media as well. So there is this two-way effects. One, the media itself, in terms of its industry, in terms of its content, in terms of its distribution, in terms of taste, is being influenced by globalization. And at the same time, media is being used as a tool, as an instrument, as a vehicle of globalization, at least cultural globalization, uh, uh, for almost the entire world. To understand globalization as a process, we have to understand, and to a certain extent, we have to do away with certain misconceptions as such. One is that often globalization is taken for granted, as if that if you let alone any country or any nation state, it will eventually automatically go towards neoliberalism and globalization. One has to remember that globalization is not necessarily a natural progression. This is not something that is emerging out of ordinary communication. It is happening. It's not like something which is happening automatically around the world. What is happening is that it's a deliberate human choice by some powerful group of nations and transnational corporations and transnational institutes and organizations like International Monetary Fund, like World Bank, and various other uh, institutions and organizations, because they are deciding about the policies, they are deciding about the regulations, and the nation state is taking a particular position, either to welcome or to resist those policies. And through that negotiations, and through that interactions, certain policy decisions are taken, which ultimately kind of pushes a nation state towards neoliberalism and forces of globalization, other forces of globalization. So it's a deliberate human choice taken by some very powerful media, powerful institutions, corporations, or organizations. And communication and information technologies, including digital technologies and digital communication technologies, they have kind of offered the method for large corporations to maximize profit by entering foreign markets. So these technologies, media and communication technologies, they are working as a tool, they are functioning as a tool to maximize the profit of the large corporations. So they give these corporations a kind of a motivation to towards globalization, towards opening up of the market. Now, what are the main flows? If we are talking about globalization, we have already talked about the interconnectedness. We have talked about how the entire world is becoming integrated into one, and the various problems, and obviously there are various uh, positive aspects as well. But what are the kind of flows through which globalization takes place? One is the goods and services. I mean, this is the most obvious one, that you have access to various new products and services, which was not simply there even 10 to 20 years before. You get to wear a specific kind of a specific brand, you get to wear a specific uh, mm, technological product, for example mobile phone or a laptop or a specific kind of a jeans, and these are available because goods and services are flowing throughout the world. Then there is labor and people. So people are migrating from one part of the world to another part of the world for job or for other political reasons, for example in the case of refugee migrants. And there is a flow of people from one territory to the other, and it has intensified over the years. It was there even in the earlier times, but it has intensified over the years for mainly for economic reasons, and also in some individual specific cases for political and other reasons. And then there is capital or money, which is kind of the lifeblood of globalization. And obviously, if you look at the various investments that are going on, the various mergers taking over, as I was talking about, not only in media sector but also in every possible industry, in every possible business sections, ultimately this is the capital that is flowing and being invested and reinvested in various sectors. And obviously technology is there, and as you can get almost the latest technologies within a few years or few months, uh, and that kind of influences and impact our life in various ways. So the question is, if you look at these four flows: goods and services, labor and people, capital and technology, if these four flows are there, the question is, which flow is most restricted and which flow is most fluid? And that would give us an idea about how globalization works. And the answer is again very simple, and you know that the most fluid flow is of the capital, because it's the lifeblood. It's through capital that globalization kind of works and makes its way. uh, and the most restricted perhaps is the labor and people, because living in a developing country and a neoliberal country like India, we can understand that it's our dream. Most of our dream is to work in a developed country, to work in Europe, to work in US or any other developed country. But it's probably an American or an European is not dreaming about working in India or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. um, and that is also one of the reasons that most of the money that is being invested is in the developing country, and the money belongs to the developed country. So the lion's share of the profit ultimately goes to the developed country, and what we are left with is an increased amount of employment opportunity, although at a much reduced wages. So and one can go on about this and the various issues related to that: the rise of the outsourcing industry, rise of the IT led works and employments, and what are the various precarity of that kind of work, and what are the various debates and discourses. But one thing is for sure, that the flows are not equal. It's not, even in terms of goods and services, even in terms of technology, it's not neutral. And most of the time it's from the global north to the global south, the advanced and the more developed north to the global south. So we are kind of uh, appropriating these technologies. We are kind of accessing these technologies at a later stage, in a much delayed manner. uh, so this is not equal. These flows are not equal, but these flows are there uh, to facilitate globalization and its various influences. So globalization of media is probably most pervasive and most, you can uh, sense it at the level of media industry model. Why? Because there is the issue of investment, there is the issue of various entrepreneurial issues are related to it. And since the capital is the lifeblood of globalization, obviously the most pervasive uh, instance of globalization would be in the media industry model. So the world is becoming much more integrated market based in capitalist and marketplace economics. So it is becoming much more profit oriented. One of the examples is that if you look at any newspaper houses, you will rarely find a rural reporting or agricultural beat reporting department. Almost none of the newspapers in India have a rural reporter or agricultural beat reporter. But at the same time, agriculture remains a very important sector of our economy, a very important and much needed. This sector needs a huge focus and attention from the public as well as the policymakers. But none of the newspapers are interested in this beat. Why? Because it's not profit making. I mean, P. Sainath in his various lectures as well as in his book has highlighted how Indian newspapers have focused on a fashion week event for weeks, while several farmers are committing suicide in Maharashtra and various other states. And just media is oblivious of the fact that this is a very important sector that needs to be highlighted. And this is also again as I have already talked about News Corp and its how it is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And this is also known as Murdochization, where various ethical and basic principles of newspaper publishing will be tweaked in favor of earning more profit, in favor of earning more income, more surplus income. And this Murdochization is happening not only in newspaper but in almost every news media business, which is aiming towards more profit and not giving much attention to the content or the needed content as such, even in the developing countries like India and various other parts of the world. So there is a pressure on nation to make media more commercial, uh, and to and obviously through the support of advertisement and others. And if you look at the telecommunication sector, even it started with the one uh, public company, uh, government owned company, but now if you look at it, it is a highly privatized domain. The most of the popular and most of the used telecommunication networks are private companies. So this came because of certain policy decisions, and now it has become a hugely competitive market. And within that competition, there is little chance for any government controlled company or organization to survive. So if you look at public service broadcasting like Doordarshan, very few people are watching Doordarshan right now. So if you look at BSNL, very few people are using BSNL right now. So it's similar in other sectors as well. So whenever there is this developmental approach, whenever there is this public service approach, these are pushed at the back seat, and profit and more profit takes front seat in this particular scenario. So so if one says that is there any way to resist it, and if someone says that no, there are certain programs, there are certain companies, there are certain practices which can actually resist it, one has to look into those practices with a much more nuanced manner. For example, uh, one can say that the most of the countries are producing increasing amounts of their own television, music, and other media content. For example, India would be an ideal example. That India is producing its media content, and it is at par with maybe the Western companies, and it's a huge market and they have a huge grip on that market. It's very rarely that a Hollywood film would be a hit film, a box office successful film, because we have so many hit Hindi film and regional films are is being screened on a daily, on a weekly basis, that we have successfully resisted. But then again, one has to understand that even those films, those television products, the streaming content, all these ultimately are produced within the context of a aggressively globalized industry, where you know the if you for example, if someone says that a typical commercial Hindi television serial, for example, Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahuti, this kind of K serials, any you take for example any K serial or any Bengali serials that are being broadcast on television channels, that you would say that this is how I'm going to resist the influences, the forces of globalization, because I'm not watching any American content, I'm not watching any European content. I'm actually watching homegrown television serial. Kabhi Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahuti. But then again, you look at the commercials, look at the advertisements of within that program. I mean, all the brands are actually international, transnational brands. So the very possibility of that program depends on global capital. If Palmolive, or for that matter Colgate, or any other transnational global companies are not willing to pay money through advertisements, then probably from the next day you will won't be able to watch that television serial. So ultimately the capital that goes into it for survival is often global capital. So even if you look, if for example, uh, uh, Big Brother, Big Boss, the program was named Big Boss. The original program was called Big Brother. or for example the reality shows for that matter, the X Factor, The Voice, or all these programs. These programs, the formats are owned by the global players. The way it is designed, the way it is structured, those are influenced by the global programs, globally hit programs and formats available in the international market. So even if you are singing an Indian song, if you are dancing a particular Indian dance format, or the narrative is heavily imbibed into Indian tradition and ethos, then again the format may be influenced by global. Maybe the advertisement and the funding that goes in, they have global uh, connection. Maybe the way the aesthetics of that particular program, the way it has been packaged, it is heavily influenced by the global television formats. So it's very difficult to resist the forces of globalization when it comes to cultural globalization, because one way or the other we are exposed to those kinds of you know various styles and tastes and contents. And it would be interesting to look at the various ways. I've already talked about the flows of globalization. Apadurai, he came up with the scapes which influence globalization, and that obviously is related to the flow of globalization. The ethnoscape, which refers to the flow of people; technoscape, which refers to the flow of technology; financescape, the flow of money or capital; idioscape, the flow of idea; and mediascape, the flow of information. Mediascape is much more relatively more important for us in this discussion, because it kind of indexes the electronic capabilities of production and dissemination, as well as the images of the world created by that media. So it kind of, the images, not only the actual media product coming into our house, but also the images and the imaginings through that images, which influence us in a certain manner. For example, I was thinking about IPL because recently it was in the news. And if you look at the IPL, for example, Knight Rider, Kolkata Knight Riders, and the name tells you that this is actually connected or associated with a specific territory, Kolkata, which is an ethno-linguistic cultural, belongs to a particular ethno-linguistic cultural community of Bengali. And most of the people who are cheering up for Kolkata Knight Riders are people belonging from West Bengal and Kolkata. But I don't know if there are very few Bengali players in the team. Even in the recent squad, probably it doesn't have a single Bengali player. But that doesn't kind of restrict the people from cheering up for them, or to enjoy the game, or to become extremely emotionally involved with the game, irrespective of the fact that none of the members belong from Kolkata, or as such, I mean, none of the players are Bengalis. What is this indicating is that uh, media images and the way it is packaged ultimately, and I'm again referring to ideological state apparatus and how it works. Media is one of the ideological state apparatus, and it does not work through coercion, it works through ideology. And these global, I mean, IPL, it is taken from a global format of a specific sporting event. So when IPL is happening, you are not actually cheering up for your national team, but you are cheering up for your dream team as such. But that dream team is actually connected to a specific territory, Kolkata or Bangla, but none of the players are Bengalis. So this very complex kind of imagining, and at the same time the engagement of the people and the audience is can only happen when we have these structures of the flow of images, the flow of various uh, kind of experiences happening at the same time. And I'm longing for that kind of experience, I'm longing for that kind of attachment, even though that attachment may only revolve around my head, inside my head, it may only take place inside my head. But then again, as we have already studied, that nation state is also vertically integrated imagination, imagined community ultimately. So uh, let me just, since we don't have much time, I'll just try to sum up the issues. Uh, what we are actually looking at is that whenever we talk about globalization, we are talking about in a very uh, polarized manner, that it is global and the local. But what we need to talk about to understand the finer nuances of globalization is that the local that we are talking about, particularly for a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural country, is actually national, and which to a certain extent can be oppressive of the local. I mean, if you look at India, where there are so many languages, so many cultures, so many different ethnic communities, uh, ultimately, if you look at look at West Bengal or Bengali communities, and the media images, the media content that we are consuming, there is a huge influence of Hindi. So we are more scared of the Hindi influence or the national level influence rather than the global influence or the international influence. Because if you look at the media sector, in terms of production and consumption, we have resisted, um, at least to a certain extent, resisted the uh, inflow of international media content. But what is more pressing for us, more important for us, is to how do we negotiate, how do we make, how do we um, come into terms with the national influence of Hindi, for that matter, in terms of media content. So most of the time when we are talking about globalization, we are not thinking that the policies, the regulations, the influences that we are witnessing of globalization is ultimately the decision taken up by a nation state. The nation has decided to allow the forces of globalization, and that is why we are being influenced by that, because it's a national policy which define a cultural identity and if the national policy allows the forces of globalization, then the national identity will take a particular kind of shape. The regulatory framework which is decided by the nation state uh, for the media organization is ultimately either pro or against globalization, and that again depends on the nation state's decision. The funding and control is also dependent on nation state. The cultural trade policy is also dependent on the nation state. So the national angle of understanding globalization is sometimes missing in this kind of discussions. Uh, so what we have to do, one has to recognize uh, that there the separate level of state structure and national policy making, which is still the crucial level of political, economic, and cultural decision making. So the bipolar model of global local may not be that fruitful, may not be that constructive, unless we are much more, attentive towards the national policies, national positions, and national regulations and national attitude towards these forces. So I think I'll just stop here, and if some questions are there, I'll attend to that and elaborate on certain things that I wanted to say. So
There are some questions.
Uh, okay, thank you, Shayanda.
thank you.
As I have stated earlier, that this lecture is specially made for the undergraduate students of Calcutta University. So I think Sayan Chattopadhyay has quite effectively covered the topics that come under uh, our syllabus. So now we would like to invite questions from the audience, from our students. We have some questions, uh, like I am highlighting one question. Uh, Orindam Patro. In what ways does newspaper affect the development of a nation?
Oh, a very good question and a very relevant question. As a matter of fact, this question kind of sums up the entire thing that I wanted to say. Uh, that if you look at television or newspaper, uh, there are various approaches, and those approaches depend on uh, the condition of the nation state. If it's the developing nation, then the approach or attitude is towards development. If it's a developed nation, then then the attitude or approach would be different, maybe to improve their living conditions and the state of affairs. But for a developing country, it is always about development. So if you look at, as I already stated briefly in the beginning of the lecture, that for newspaper, it was a public service at the very beginning. Even after the immediate post-independence period, it was public service, nation building. If you look at television, the first television broadcasting in India was aimed entirely towards development, community development, rural development, and various other things. Even the first, if you remember the first television series, TV serial, Hum Log, it was aimed for family planning, which was taken from Latin American television series, which tried to convey the message that if you have a large family, then there will be a lot of problem. If you have a small family, then it is easier to manage. But the way it was packaged, that people forgot about the actual family planning approach, and they were kind of sucked into the narrative. So it depends on the nation state what approach would be taken. And so at the very beginning, there was this developmental approach, was this public service approach. But right now, the newspaper or the media, I mean, television or any such media, is not at all concerned with such the development of the nation. What it is concerned with is basically making profit. And if you cannot actually blame them, this is about survival. It's not only about making profit. You can have alternative publications, you can have specific kind of, I mean, Professor Sengupta will be able to tell you that there are various little magazines, and whoever is involved with little magazine, they will be able to tell you that it's very difficult to get funding, it is very difficult to survive. You are always kind of threatened that maybe next month, maybe next week, I'll not be able to publish because there is very little funding. So this kind of anxiety will be there, that I will not be able to survive. So most of the media companies, most of the media houses, they are not at all uh, concerned with the development of the nation. They are mainly concerned with how can I survive by making profit. The only media houses which are concerned with development and others are the public service broadcasting, like Doordarshan. Doordarshan is a hugely expensive public service broadcasting, probably the largest public service broadcaster, and they are concerned with national integration. They are concerned with developmental projects and all these things. But then again, very few people, if you look at us and our friends, there are very few people who actually watch Doordarshan anymore. They are mainly, their living room, drawing room is flooded with satellite television and cable television network, various channels. uh, so it's a very pressing question, and media has very little concern for developmental issues and developmental questions. As I already told you, there is not a single newspaper with agricultural or rural reporting. So that gives you an idea that they are not at all concerned. Maybe new media or the digital media is giving an alternative platform of doing this. So there are several such uh, platforms, several such publications or websites which are focusing on developmental issues. But then again, the access is a problem. Then again, how many of 45% of people are actually having internet connection in India, in according to 21 statistics. So a large amount of people do not have internet connection in whichever means. I mean, even I'm including mobile internet. So this is a very pressing concern, especially for a developing country like this.
Thank you, Arindam, for asking an important question. Now we have a question from Navomitra Das. He has asked how to counter fake news circulated by media.
Very important question. And fake news, I didn't have time to go into this because that would require another lecture, because it is becoming so influential in our everyday lives. But you are absolutely right to connect fake news with globalization. And this is one of the results, one of the outcomes of globalization, fake news. And there are various ways. I mean, there are various practical ways of doing it. I'm not going into it because there are various organizations which are working against fake news, and there are, for example, when an election is happening, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, they have specific algorithms. There are dedicated people working to counter fake news. But what is from our side, it is important for us to become aware. For example, WhatsApp has added a specific uh, tag that multiple forwarded message. If I'm saying it correctly, probably something like that. Multiple forwarded message that gives you an idea that this message has been forwarded multiple times, and that is the point when you have to be very skeptical about the message, whether I should forward it or not, whether I should take it as truth or whether I should take it as fake news. So these things are there, and every time, almost on a daily basis, technology is trying to counter the fake news, because the problem is not fake news. The problem is that there is such a prevalence of fake news is that the truthful information need to prove itself as truth. Even I'm, for example, all of you are Calcutta University undergraduate students. uh, the last notification that came into our WhatsApp groups and other social media groups, we are very much skeptical about whether that particular notification was truthful or not, because there was a scanned signature and all these things. But as it turned out that it was truthful, it was a original document. So this anxiety regarding fake news and original truthful news is going to remain for several years now. But technological means are there to counter it, and we have to be very much aware of specific kind of news and the way that news is being constructed. So these things are
Uh, Shongita Noshkor has asked, did the mass media trigger and create the globalization of culture?
right. Again, a very
Uh,
important question related to this. Yes. Um, to a certain extent, yes, obviously. If you are talking about cultural globalization, then mass media is one of the most important factors. And if you are talking about globalization as such, because as I've already talked about, there are various spheres of globalization, there are various types of globalization, there are various flows of globalization. But if we are concentrating on globalization of culture or cultural globalization, then media is the main vehicle through which it is spread. And if you look at India, I mean, for example, I mean, look at McDonald's for that matter. McDonald's is an international multinational company which has its existence in various other countries other than India, and it is considered as one of the markers of, like MTV, one of the markers of globalization, McDonaldization and all these things. But then again, one of the most popular dishes of McDonald's is Mac Aloo Tikki. And that is even being sold in US and other European countries. Macalu tikki, with the name Macalu tikkis, and within brackets is said potato. So these contra flows, these counter flows are also there. And what is here happening is that this is about a decision regarding what I'm going to eat. But that decision is ultimately dependent on the images that are being shown on television or newspaper or magazines or billboards or hoardings. So ultimately, media is one of the most important vehicles of cultural globalization, and that has its effects on various other factors and various other fields and spheres as well. So you are absolutely right that mass media kind of, if not triggered, but it kind of the most important vehicle of cultural globalization.
Pradeep Shordar asks, what is the future of newspapers in the age of rapid digitization?
Uh, the future is different for developed country and developed. If you look at the statistics, then the future is very bleak for newspapers, any kind of print media, because the audience is shifting towards digitalization, digital devices and digital network and all these things. But if you look at India and even China for that matter, even the statistics will tell you that we are actually looking at a brighter future. because even though there is a shift towards digitalization, the circulation of newspaper and magazine has increased over the years, which is exactly the opposite to developed country like in Europe and in America. So here, I think the newspaper is going to stay, the magazines are going to stay, and but it would obviously compete with various other uh, platforms, various other medias as well. But in the developed country, uh, newspapers mostly and magazines are mostly into portable digital devices because audiences are slowly losing interest in long form journalism, long form writing, and they are willing to get information and news in bits and pieces. But that trend is catching up, but that trend is not, uh, at least in terms of force, is not there in India. In India. So these two different developments are happening at the same time.
Okay, we don't have any question further from the students. So if Shamrat Da or Partho has any question.
Uh, First of all, I want to thank Shayon for this very incisive and useful, informative lecture. Uh, I was just, as I was listening, I was just wondering about one point that uh, when we talk about media, we generally refer to newspapers, we refer to television channels and all that. But mass communication, within mass communication, advertisement is also a very, very important thing, and it is totally market oriented. There is no, you know, there is no
Correct.
uh, shadow about it. There is no confusion about it. It is totally market oriented, and it is meant to taste influence the taste of the audience directly. So I was just thinking aloud about it, that what is the difference between the way we think about mass communication, the ethical aspect of it, and the complete erasure of the ethical aspect in case of the advertisement industry, where the increasing and the changing consumption habit is more important.
Right. Absolutely right. And advertisement is known as commercial communication. So,
Hmm.
but then again, if we consider advertisement, and if we just, for the moment, if we just don't think about how scrupulous it can be, then the question of ethics becomes problematic because it is saying that this communication is meant to be commercial. This communication is profit oriented. This commercial is sales oriented. This commercial, this advertisement is commerce oriented. So because it is very straightforward, then probably it is not unethical. The problem is that the way it is inserted, the way it is packaged, the way it
Hmm.
tries to influence the people, the way it tries to, increase the retentive capacity of the people, then it may become unethical, and those issues may emerge. But as such, there is no problem because it, as you said, it's very straightforwardly says that it is commercial communication. But then
Yes,
again,
and no, sometimes it becomes very confusing for the audience also, because the way it is presented, the moment I used to open ABP Anando site or Anando
yeah,
Bazar Patrika site, there is a long
the content
like
is blocked.
advertisement from the content is blocked, and there is a long advertisement coming from the BJP campaigning online, and it can be confusing for a regular audience, like who is not that aware of, and all that, that this is the kind of news reporting. Online Pashchimbongo, the West Bengal should be free from all kinds of injustice which is happening, and BJP should come in power. So whether it is a reporting, or it is a message, or it is an advertisement, sometimes this kind of advertisement also come up in the newspaper amidst the articles also. It is also kind of
Absolutely.
format. I don't know the
You
name.
have raised a very important point. I just want to take 2 minutes. That even in what you are saying, the Anando Bazar digital site or Anando Bazar app, you can actually differentiate between the actual advertisement and the news content. I mean, it's very bothering, it's very problematic, it's irritating, but at the same time, you know that this is an advertisement. If you push that cross button at the top, and it will go away, and you will be able to read the news. But even in print newspaper, there at least there was this pressing concern about paid news, particularly
mm,
just before 2014 election, and in 2016 election, the paid news was a huge concern, where you cannot even distinguish between actual news and the news which has been paid for. So press commission and press council came with the recommendation that you have to tell the reader or the audience that this particular segment has been paid for. So right now all the Hindi newspaper, and this was a pressing concern for the Hindi belt particularly, and so even in English newspaper, in Bangla newspaper, you will see, if you look closely, that if a particular reporting has been paid for, then it is either written advertisement or advertorial or Biggapon Crore Potro. These kind of markers are there just to help the readers to distinguish between the paid content and the actual news content. And if you remember the Nira Radia case, the public relation officer Neera Radia, who was in close contact with some of the highest ranked corporate bodies, and who was and the tape is available on YouTube, and how she was influencing the media houses towards a particular kind of reporting in exchange of various kind of favors, and how she was knowing that which minister would hold a particular department even before the that department has been distributed publicly. So these influences are already there, but again the effort is from the media industry side to distinguish these things, because news media, if we are talking about news media as such, the very existence of news media is on the fact that the audience or the readers will be able to differentiate between what is fact and what is fiction. If these two things overlap, then the very existence of news media will perish. So there is an effort from the industry house as well for their very existence to distinguish the two, or else it would become very problematic.
absolutely.
Partho, any
It
question?
was a very good talk, Shayanda. I just wanted to. I was thinking about the revenue model, and there is a channel or an organization called News Laundry, and they have crowdfunding going on, and I think that's a very good revenue model. That probably is going to be a very new thing for the future. That is one. Secondly, as far as that is a different question altogether. Observation, actually. We were talking about Shamradda also mentioned reporting, advertisement, those things. So now, as far as I remember, there was a mandate from the Election Commission before, way long ago, that the exit polls should be banned, and the reporting on exit polls should be banned before the results were out. And newspapers do follow that system. Uh, but this year, and even before them, what I observed was that, say, some minister says that we will get these many seats or whatever, and those things are printed rampantly, and these do influence public perception uh, of election and everything for that matter. So you do not really, these are not even titled as let's say paid news or advertisement, nothing like that. This is clear cut reporting. We are talking at a time, we are holding this obviously for undergraduate students, but the media, the news media, at least in our country, is going through the most terrible crisis that it has in independent India. uh, it is completely compromised. We can almost say that it is almost completely compromised, where reporting and the politics of it, you can't really take them out. And even the case also lies with the left liberal media as well. We have some sub judice cases in the news recently, and we all know about those things. So there are these are very tricky places that we are talking about right now. So we can't really differentiate between advertising, reporting, paid news, fake news. Uh, we live in a post-truth world, it seems.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I totally agree with you. But I just want to add that this is not the crisis this is not the crisis for India. This is a global crisis, even for the American news media. You see, this is a huge global crisis. That is why these platforms like News Laundry and various others are needed, because these are the alternative platforms, and because those are getting the funding from crowdsourcing and various donations. Sometimes the readers give them money. So these news houses, these news platforms are not dependent on corporate funding or political backing most of the time. Maybe that may change over the years for some reasons or the other. So these alternative news sources are necessary, where it is not under a huge corporate body, or it is not getting funding from a particular political party or its associates. So they can report or they can give their opinion in a truly independent manner. The alternative independent news sources must work as a supplement, not as a substitute as such, because the mainstream newspapers and news media will always be there. You cannot compete with them because of its reach, because of its marketing, as I've already discussed. But it should stay as a supplement to them. So if there is a news, I can go to various other alternative means to verify and to understand what is actually happening, what is the politics behind it, why he has suddenly said that, whether it has been edited in a particular manner or not. So this is there, absolutely, I agree. And not only the comments and everything, as Partha was mentioning, even the live broadcast of particular political rallies from the very beginning till the end, without giving any such news, and even the scheduled broadcast, news broadcast are actually withdrawn just to show that particular political rally. uh, these are questions regarding ethics, these are questions regarding principles of news reporting, and these are being compromised, obviously, not only in terms of election, but almost on a daily basis. These are being compromised, but it's a global phenomenon, it's not unique to India.
Okay, thank you, Shayanda. I think uh, time has come to an end. So, I hope that these two lectures have been beneficial for our students, for the listeners. Uh, Now, I would like to request Professor Shamrat Sengupta to give the formal vote of thanks, and after that, we'll end this broadcast. Thank you.
I sincerely thank Professor Sayan Chattopadhyay to agree to speak in this forum, which is a student-oriented lecture, but he went beyond that and gave many insightful ideas which we will carry with us and discuss even after the conference, this online series is over. I think the students will also keep discussing these things among themselves, and if they have any question, please send them to the WhatsApp group, and we can send it back to Shayon. And Shayon has kindly agreed to give some materials which he has, which we will circulate in due course. Many thanks, Shayon, for being here. I also thank my departmental colleagues, Pavel Muni, uh, Parthopratim Raichaudhuri, and Meghbaron Haiti. They have been a constant support, particularly our new head of the department, Pavel Muni, who is doing a great job, constantly organizing and helping us. With this happy note, I will end. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We end
Thank
here.
you.
Okay, goodbye. Good night, all.
Good night.